In the beginning, there was an ancestral race which, upon facing extinction, decided to preserve their legacy by sending out the seeds of life. They consisted in either a white moon carrying the embryo of a divine being called Adam, or a black moon carrying the embryo of a divine being called Lilith, and innumerable copies were spread amongst the cosmos. Each moon carried half the original qualities of the ancestral race. While Adam carried the genes to create angels, which are divine beings with immense power but lacking free will, Lilith carried the genes to produce frail mortal beings endowed with free will. For unknown reasons, the first ancestral race feared that their cosmic children would become as powerful as them. So in efforts to prevent both seeds from intermingling and recreating their own glory, each moon also carried a Spear of Longinus, a fail-safe device that would activate and put their own seed in stasis should it land on the same planet as another seed. And that is exactly what happened when Lilith crash-landed on Earth, only to find that Adam was already there. And had Lilith's spear not been lost to space, it would have been her spear activating and sealing her and her progeny in stasis. But instead, Adam's spear was left with no choice but to activate and suspend his reproduction for 4 billion years. So, if the Spear of Longinus is how Lilith life triumphed on Earth over angelic life, could anybody explain to me what the hell that is? And what, there's 2 now? What? And, is that Mary? Wait, who the f*** is Mary anyway? And what is a vessel of the atoms? And what about... Hello Funkers, Tony Funk here, and in part 3 of my Evangelion Rebuild series, I will attempt to make sense of my burning questions, as well as revise some of my initial observations of Evangelion 1.1 and 2.2 after having been enlightened by this film. And later I will analyze both Seele's and Gendo's diverging plans and make sense of their symbiotic, or should I say parasitic relationship, in an attempt to kill God. So strap on your seatbelts and prepare to watch me get everything wrong prior to my first viewing of Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time. For starters, this film really took me for a spin, confusing the gonads out of me and leaving me wanting more. Not necessarily in a good way, mind you. Despite this film having some of the most incredible visuals out of the 3 films I've seen in the series, I felt the plot lacking as meaningful character interactions were limited to Shinji and Kaworu's brief budding friendship. Everything else felt like either exposition, action sequences, or cryptic dialogues. I am willing to say that though this film could have done a better job of creating a compelling story, it did reveal some fascinating aspects of the Evangelion lore, as well as making deciphering it all a living nightmare. One of the biggest mysteries in the original Neon Genesis Evangelion storyline was the relationship between Gendo and Seele. Why did they need each other? And why was Gendo obeying Seele without even knowing the full Dead Sea Scrolls Apocrypha? I mean, it seemed like he was taking a big chance following his own agenda while his bosses seemed to know way more about the prophecies than he ever did. But before I get to the revelation that explains everything, let me go into the background of these diverging plans. This film opens with Seele's antithetically named rivals Wille, attempting to rescue Shinji and Unit 1 before Gendo's nerve can get to him first. Or at least, that's the implication. Wille is revealed to be an anti-nerve organization, presumably led by Masato and Ritsuko, in order to prevent further impacts. What's interesting is their on-the-nose Team Human name, Wille, which means will in German, whereas Team Angel, Seele, means soul. This immediately establishes the conflict at hand. Seele's ultimate goal is to evolve humanity with a successful impact, thus turning everyone into a soul, whereas Wille wants to continue the status quo of keeping humans unevolved, but with their free will intact. But okay, why were Shinji and Unit 1 locked up in space to begin with? Well, in the film it is revealed that Gendo and Grand Moff, Fuyutsuki, were both waiting on the completion of Unit 13 before they could attempt their plan to incur the 4th impact. Shortly before Shinji and Kaworu were sent out to remove the Spears of Longinus, we see Unit 13 emerging from juices of some sort, and we hear Fuyutsuki say, "The final executor is complete at last," in reference to Unit 13. This implies that Nerve could not really do anything with Shinji until Unit 13 was finally completed. Because of this, I can only assume the following. Assumption A. Shinji was deemed dangerous by Nerve, so he had to be kept in stasis within Unit 1 until the right time came, or at the very least so Gendo could attempt to achieve his goals without Shinji interfering. Assumption B. Rei was taken out of Unit 1 after she was rescued by Shinji to be used for a 4th impact. And Assumption C. Nerve was going to eventually get Shinji out of Unit 1 if their plan didn't work out, but only if Unit 13 was ready. So alright, let me explore my first assumption. I believe Shinji is both dangerous and useful to Nerve. His emotional outburst was enough to give Unit 1 a similar power to that of Lilith based on the assumption that his ego unleashed Unit 1's original nature. Where's my proof? Well, if Unit 1 is a soulless clone of Lilith, yes, with a fragment of Yui's soul stuck in it of course, and Shinji is a Lilith soul, then after a certain threshold of intensity, Shinji's ego could theoretically mimic that of Lilith's. And that's what I believe happened in the climax of 2.2, hence why Unit 1 developed a halo. Now to add further validity to my claim, we all know Kaworu contains Adam's soul but is contained within a Lilith body, which is why Kaworu does not display a halo over his head. In other words, Kaworu by himself is not fully divine. Yet when he's piloting Unit 6 in 2.2, we can see it sport a halo because Unit 6 is a physical clone of Adam. Well, it's actually Adam, but we'll get to that later. And only when piloted by Kaworu can it mimic Adam's full divinity. Okay, so now that I established that Shinji's emotions have the potential to mimic Lilith's ego if he's triggered, then I can explain why he needed to be locked away in Unit 1. Gendo, now used to seeing Shinji being a disobedient pilot, could not risk Shinji getting in the way of his plans, suspecting that Shinji would not take kindly to Instrumentality. So what I believe happened was that ugly mess in Central Dogma we saw in the film was Gendo's attempt to trigger a 4th impact with Shinji out of the picture, and only when his attempts failed did he decide to use Shinji once his plan B was completed. Now if this is the case, this would explain why Gendo didn't just outright kill Shinji and proceed to make a 4th impact without him anyway, and it also explains why Nerve rescues Shinji from Wille conveniently right before Unit 13's completion. So now that it's obvious that Shinji was a liability for Nerve's plans, how is he also ironically useful to them? Well, I believe that Shinji now houses both a Lilith soul and an angelic soul. Before you yell at me though, allow me to explain my scandalous claim. In my last video regarding 2.2, I assumed that Rei Ayanami would return in the series as a 3/4 divine being, carrying Lilith's soul, the 10th angel's physical body, and its fruit of life. I assumed this because in the end of 2.2, we see the 10th angel's disintegrated mass merge into Rei before being pulled into Unit 1. What I didn't really think about was if all of those attributes would stick to Rei once separated from Unit 1. Therefore, my current belief is that Shinji inherited the soul of the 10th angel, whilst Rei only inherited the 10th angel's body, if that at all. Here's my evidence. When Shinji is initially recovered by Wille, Misato is skeptical about calling Shinji, well, Shinji, asking Ritsuko if it makes sense to call him that, only for Ritsuko to state that his physiology matches that of his pre-near 3rd impact form. If Shinji had just been trapped for 14 years without him undergoing any changes, would they even be asking these kinds of questions? Also, another thing we have to think about is the DSS choker. Shinji's a human, and had always been a human, so to assume that prior to the events of 2.2, Shinji's overwhelming emotions could cause some kind of world-shattering event would be unthinkable, yet he is outfitted with a deification shutdown system choker in 3.3. So let's think about this for a minute. Prior to the end of 2.2, we have witnessed Shinji undergo some overwhelming emotion, so much so to the point of quitting being an Evangelion pilot twice. Yet at no point did Gendo nor anybody who knows anything about the secret human instrumentality project freak out about Shinji's emotional outbursts. It wasn't until Shinji was inside of an Eva where he deified after vowing to get Rei back from the 10th angel. So, if Shinji could only deify while inside an Eva, which is a creature that is a soul short from being a deity, why would Wille outfit him with a deification shutdown choker if they made it clear that he would never pilot an Eva ever again? It's also super interesting to hear Kaworu state that the shocker was originally made for him, making us infer that it was made so that he would be obedient to Seele and/or Gendo. So in essence, if normal humans don't deify with emotions, then the only reason Shinji would have to wear the choker is because the absorbed angelic soul within him runs the risk of deifying. We see later in the film how Kaworu, despite carrying Adam's soul, doesn't deify until the 12th angel emerges, and eventually turning him into the 13th angel. This means that deification is something that can be dormant, which is why Shinji's DSS choker was a preemptive measure. As an aside, it also explains the idea that any vestiges of angels or Adam's DNA can become an angel should the time coincide with the Dead Sea Scrolls prophecy. For example, the 9th angel spontaneously generated from Unit 3's existing biomass, which caught everybody by surprise, thus causing everyone to be skeptical of any existing vestiges of Adam. This explains Nerve's mistrust of Kaworu and later Shinji. Alright, now on to my next assumption. I believe that Rei was in fact recovered by Gendo prior to the Central Dogma event that resulted in 2 Spears of Longinus being used. My evidence is quite simple. Kaworu explains to Shinji during their descent to Central Dogma that Rei's clone can't pilot Unit 13 because her soul is somewhere else, implying that this Rei doesn't have a soul. Assuming Hideaki Anno didn't pull another crazy plot twist on us, I believe that the first Rei we see in the Rebuild series was the one that was intended to fuse with Lilith to complete Lilith when the time was right. So with this assumption, we can now extrapolate that Lilith was fused with the recovered Rei due to the fact that Lilith's head looks exactly like Rei. We also see that the 12th angel absorbs Lilith and basically turns into a giant blood blob shaped like Rei before being absorbed by Unit 13. And now to my final assumption. Shinji was trapped in Unit 1 by Nerve as a contingency because he had the potential to be useful. You see, either Gendo or Seele anticipated that Wille would attempt to thwart their plans to incur Instrumentality, which means that once Rei was recovered, Shinji had to be taken somewhere safe so that both he himself couldn't interfere and so that Wille couldn't easily recover him. This means that Seele's original plan was probably as follows. Rei was to be merged with Lilith so that Lilith would have both a divine biomass and a divine soul. Then Kaworu was to pilot Unit 6, essentially completing Adam, and then that completed Adam was supposed to fuse with Lilith and incur Instrumentality under Seele's terms because Kaworu is essentially Seele's boy, so to speak. As a result, in case Wille interfered, Shinji had to be the backup because he carries an angel soul and a Lilith soul, which is super useful in case Seele or Gendo find themselves in a pinch and require extra 4th impact ingredients. So now that I explained the 3 major assumptions I made about the circumstances regarding Shinji's entrapment in space, let me attempt to piece together what I believed happened in Central Dogma after the near 3rd impact and before the events of 3.3. So at some point, Seele must have congratulated Kaworu for stopping the 3rd impact and allowing their version of Instrumentality to still be possible. Meanwhile, Misato, Ritsuko, and the rest of the Nerve employees were probably freaked out because the thing that they wanted to avoid this whole time almost happened. They probably didn't form Wille yet due to a lack of evidence that Gendo was up to anything fishy. But then at some point, Gendo forced Rei to fuse with Lilith, which caused Misato and Nerve to detect Lilith's full AT field, and in an uh-oh, not again move, Misato used the dummy plug on Unit 6 to prevent any souls from using it. Thinking it'd be a good idea to kill Lilith, she instructs Unit 6 to kill her, which Unit 6 obliges due to it being controlled by the dummy plug. I presume Gendo freaked out when this happened because his whole plan was going to shit, but unbeknownst to him, Seele anticipated the 12th angel to form from Unit 6's biomass, which caused it to merge with Rei's decapitated body. Even though Lilith's biomass remained, Rei's soul died the moment she was decapitated, because, well, being decapitated kills people even if they're merged with divine beings, as seen at the end of Evangelion, when Shinji's rejection of Instrumentality kills Rei. So at this point, with the 12th angel possessing the biomass of Adam in the form of Unit 6, Lilith's biomass, and its own angelic soul, it becomes a Lilith soul shy of being able to incur an impact. Now I'd imagine that once Misato saw the ingredients to cause an impact after Shinji rescued Rei, she must have ordered both Asuka and Mary to spear both the 12th angel and Lilith. This leads me to the assumption that Misato must have known where the spears were, because I can only assume that it was her who would have ordered this 3/4 divine creature to die. Now before I go into the next part of my hypothetical Central Dogma situation, I gotta explain the significance of the 2 spears. So in my 2.2 analysis, I mistakenly referred to the Spear of Cassius as the Spear of Longinus when Kaworu puts the kibosh on Shinji's near 3rd impact. I should have known better though. The reason isn't only because the Spear of Cassius looks way different, but because the spear functioned in a completely different way. You see, in the scene where we hear about the contact experiment, we hear how the contact with Adam gets out of control, and yet the Spear of Longinus doesn't stop the 2nd impact. We can only hear Gendo say, "I don't care if it only makes a small difference, keep the damage to an absolute minimum." So, from this piece of dialogue, we can imply that the Spear of Longinus' functionality is only to prevent a seed of life from producing life as opposed to preventing impacts. We also know that when inserted into Lilith, it weakens her to an extent. So of course, the spear used on Shinji in Unit 1 couldn't have been the Spear of Longinus, since it not only undeified Unit 1, but also stopped the 3rd impact. So after seeing what the Spear of Cassius can do, and after seeing that the only type of spear available during the 2nd impact was the Spear of Longinus, I can only imagine that the Spear of Cassius was a post-2nd impact modification of the Spear of Longinus. A man-made modification to the Spear of Longinus after learning that the Spear of Longinus was ineffective for preventing impacts. And I don't believe this is far-fetched because in the end of Evangelion, we see the mass-produced Evas use modified replicas of the Spear of Longinus on Asuka. So before I get back into my speculation regarding the Central Dogma situation, I want to break down what I believe the Spear of Cassius can do. Well, for starters, it separates the elements that make deities full deities, as seen with how Unit 1 lost its halo, and as a result the third impact was halted. In addition to that, unlike the Spear of Longinus, that weakens a deity and prevents it from asexually reproducing, the Spear of Cassius completely puts the elements in suspended animation, meaning that once removed, the elements cannot simply go back to being normal, but rather require some effort to reawaken, as seen with Shinji, who spent 14 years with the Spear of Cassius removed, yet remained in suspended animation. So this leads me to believe that Misato had ordered Asuka or Mary to find the Spear of Cassius and use it on Unit 6 since it was carrying the 12th angel, and by doing so she either believed that the 12th angel would die, or at the very least would go into suspended animation and halt Gendo's ability to simply recover Shinji and throw him into the mix, or literally any other 14-year-old Lilith soul around. And then for safe measure, similar to how Lilith was already speared with Longinus prior to the events of 3.3, Misato ordered the Spear of Longinus to return to her as a way to prevent her from creating any more Lilith life for the time being. The thing is though, Gendo was probably one step ahead at this point and probably switched out the Spear of Cassius with another Spear of Longinus, as a way to ensure that eventually he can enact his plan in the future. Whether this decoy simply had a giant spear tip glued to it is unknown to me, but for the longest time it had everyone including Kaworu fooled, as evidenced by Kaworu and Mary figuring out that they were bamboozled by the King of the Lilith. Okay, now that I explained what I believe happened during the 14-year time skip, I must now explain what Kaworu's initial plan was, and how it was used against him by Gendo. So originally Kaworu must have believed that he was going to thwart Gendo's plans by putting Instrumentality on his own terms. The way this would have hypothetically worked was that he and Shinji would have piloted Unit 13, which would have made it 3/4 divine, only Lilith's biomass short of being fully divine, and as such capable of opening the doors of Guff. Then Kaworu would have returned the souls that were destroyed by the near third impact as people instead of LCL, and under his terms he would have undone Shinji's near third impact. This means that Kaworu needed both spears for this to work. The reason for this is that had Unit 6 been impaled by Cassius instead of Longinus, Unit 6 along with the 12th angel would have been put in suspended animation and separated from Lilith's biomass. In this scenario, Unit 13 would simply pull out Cassius and allow Unit 6 carrying the 12th angel to fall off Lilith's decapitated body. Then he would remove Longinus to allow Lilith's soulless biomass to regenerate, and then fuse with Lilith's regenerated biomass. And considering that Unit 13 is basically Adam, Kaworu is Adam's soul, and Shinji is a Lilith soul, this would include the 4 required elements to start another impact. Instead, what happened was that since Cassius was switcherooed by Gendo with Longinus, upon removing Longinus, the 12th angel reanimated. Of course, once Ray released it by cutting Unit 6's head off, and then absorbed Lilith's biomass, forming a giant Ray head, and hijacked Unit 13, which was carrying Shinji, a viable Lilith soul, not to mention Adam's biomass. This meant that the conditions of Instrumentality would be carried out by either Gendo or Seele, whoever was controlling the 12th angel at the time. And maybe Kaworu would have tried to override the 12th angel, but because his dumbass put on the DSS choker in an attempt to get Shinji to trust him, he had to die once Seele's prophecy was met about killing the 13th angel. So, once Kaworu got catsupped, it only left the 12th angel to implement the terms of Instrumentality. Another interesting thing to note here is that angels seem to appear sequentially, meaning that an angel cannot coexist at the same time as another angel, which to me implies that Kaworu became the 13th angel the moment the 12th angel ceased to be an angel, when it merged with Adam and Shinji. So it's super likely that either Gendo, Seele, or both foresaw this as a way to kill Kaworu in a sneaky way. Now, the next part of my hypothesis is how Seele planned on controlling the 12th angel to put Instrumentality on their own terms. In order for me to explain this, I'm going to make some really wild claims here. I know, shocker, right? Okay, ready for this? I believe Seele members were part of the contact experiment and as a result caused the second impact. Whether it be to fulfill prophecy or to facilitate their goals for Instrumentality, they became immortal beings trapped as embryos that were later transferred to monolithic-like structures. Originally, throughout the entire time that I was watching Neon Genesis Evangelion and the end of Evangelion, I believed that the members of Seele were actually human beings using their sound-only monoliths as a type of cool avatar. But after seeing how once the 12th angel fused with Unit 13, Gendo started offing the Seele members, I realized that they were the monoliths. In fact, you can see their nervous system when Gendo starts shutting them off. This to me illustrates a lot of things. For starters, it explains why Gendo and Seele don't trust each other. For example, Gendo has a lot of leverage on Seele, or so he believes because he can kill them at any time. Yet Seele has leverage on Gendo because they know Gendo wants to see Yui again, and they're the only ones who know the full Dead Sea Scrolls Apocrypha, and use that as a way to keep Gendo from going rogue by only providing information in small increments. In essence, they've been both manipulating each other and using each other to achieve their own goals. So this leads me to my hypothesis about putting instrumentality on their own terms. If the 12th angel is just a mindless monster, how could either Gendo or Seele coax it to do their bidding? Well, this is where the Vessel of the Atoms comes in. I'm going to start with Gendo's plan because it requires one less step than Seele's. But first, what is a vessel? A vessel is nothing more than a container for things. In Evangelion, we see how most Evas are either clones of Adam or Lilith, and are simply vessels for people to control. Sure, Evas are controlled by kids, but they can also be controlled by dummy plugs as well. So could it be that the Vessel of the Atoms is a giant dummy plug meant to surrogate Kaworu's role as a decision maker and simply follow Gendo's orders to make the kind of instrumentality that he wants? Could it be that the Vessel of the Atoms is a vessel for Adam? Well, here's my evidence for this claim. The moment the 12th angel essentially takes over Unit 13, Gendo starts claiming a victory by offing the Seele members. This implies that with Kaworu out of the way, and the 12th angel in control of Unit 13, Gendo can handle the rest and do what he wants. But how? Well, we know under his command he has Rei's clone, which is a soulless and obedient version of Rei, who is piloting the Vessel of the Atoms. At one point prior to Unit 13's transformation, we hear Mary ask Rei to abandon Unit 9 before she turns into the Vessel of the Atoms, implying that at some point Unit 9 would undergo some sort of transformation. Then, when the Vessel of the Atoms starts infiltrating the Wunder, Asuka engages the vessel and realizes that the entirety of it is a core, much like the 12th angel was. This to me means that the Vessel of the Atoms, much like an angel's soul, is one of the souls of Adam alongside Kaworu, and in this particular case, the 12th angel. This implies that if Kaworu needed to die because he posed a threat to Gendo's version of instrumentality, then the 12th angel could be overridden. And if the 12th angel could be overridden by another core, then the likely candidate is the Vessel of the Atoms. So in summation, the Vessel of the Atoms is a vessel that carries Adam's soul, and to further extrapolate, it's an Eva designed to carry an angel's soul, as opposed to carrying a 14-year-old Lilith's soul. Presumably, what I believe would have eventually happened was that as soon as the Vessel of the Atoms hacked into the Wunder and eliminated its only opposition, it would then merge with Unit 13, ousting the 12th angel, and then it was to follow the source code it was programmed to do, and as a result, do instrumentality to Gendo's liking. This is probably why Mary warned Rei's clone to abandon ship, because once that happened, she would probably have been absorbed into the new Adam. And what about Seele's plan? Clearly, Seele was cool with Gendo killing them because they were confident they too had already won. Nobody says rest assured or wishes have already been granted, unless they had an ace up their sleeve, right? Well, it seems that had Asuka not killed the Vessel of the Atoms, Gendo would have lost because Rei's obedient little clone loses complete control of Unit 9, and we see the Seele logo all throughout the entry plug interface. This means that Seele's confidence stems from the fact that they had already hacked the Vessel of the Atoms to override Gendo's instructions and do their own bidding. So in a way, Gendo lost to Seele and was lucky to have Wille stop the fourth impact. Now before I talk about what I believe Gendo and Seele's diverging plans were all along, I've reached the point where I have to do some housekeeping and address a few proofs and peculiarities. Let me begin by talking about Shinji being
a surprise tool that can help us later.
After having explained what I believe to have occurred in Central Dogma during the time skip, I can now address Shinji's usage by both Gendo and Seele. Once Kaworu decides to clean up the mess he unwittingly helped create by spearing his Unit 13 with both Spears of Longinus, he blows up, dying with the erroneous belief that his death would close the doors of Guff. Well, he either forgot that Unit 13 is fused with the 12th Angel's core, or more realistically, he believed that since he became the 13th Angel, the 12th Angel's essence ceased to exist once it fused with Lilith's biomass, effectively being assimilated by Lilith. Remember, angels can only exist one at a time. Whatever his belief, he didn't take into account the idea that even if he did die, and even if the 12th angel was completely assimilated by Lilith, that Shinji could potentially still harbor the 10th angel's soul. And under that assumption, Shinji would have both an angelic soul and a Lilith soul, and Unit 13 would have both Adam's biomass and Lilith's biomass, effectively keeping all of the ingredients to create a fourth impact. What backs this hypothesis up is that once Kaworu dies, one pair of Unit 13's eyes shut off, indicating the death of one of the pilots. Yet Mary shows surprise that the doors of Guff remain open, and then immediately realizes that, and I quote, Pups was Seele's backup. This means that all along, Seele anticipated that they need Shinji just in case their Central Dogma experiment were to be sabotaged by Nerve's defectors. Alright, now the next bit of housekeeping I have to do is explain why there's a spear of Cassius and 2 spears of Longinus just laying around, when there's only supposed to be 1 spear of Longinus. I don't know. Next question. Okay, I'll try to explain this. Once Unit 13 goes all crazy and becomes fully divine, Mary says something really interesting. She claims that Unit 13 is one of the surviving atoms. And well, you have no idea how bad of a crab swirl this took me for. In fact, it confused me so bad I had to rewatch 1.1 and 2.2. And though I still don't exactly know what's going on, I've concluded that there are at the very least 3 atoms, possibly 4. And as such, there have to be at least 3 Liliths, possibly 4 if I've learned anything from the gods in Dragon Ball. Just kidding. Though there's 0 evidence for my 3 to 4 Lilith's claim, there is some evidence for my atoms claim. Let's begin with 1.1. In the final scene of 1.1, we see Kaworu emerge from a coffin on the moon with a giant atom-looking creature chilling in a hole. Though I didn't think about what that could be, I eventually realized upon rewatching the 3 films so far that that is Adam, at least an atom, and it was used by Kaworu as Unit 6. There is a scene in Tabga Base where that same atom-looking creature is being outfitted with Unit 6's armor. As an aside, we also see a wrapped-up spear of Cassius, implying that it is the modified spear of Longinus that was found with the atom. Then if we add Unit 13 and the atom that was used during the second impact, we get a grand total of 3. And since we know there's a spear of Cassius that was hidden somewhere, a fake spear of Cassius that was actually a spear of Longinus, and another spear of Longinus, that's 3 corresponding spears for 3 atoms. The reason I think it's possible there are 4 atoms is quite silly, but when we see the flashback about the second impact, we see 4 divine-looking beings with halos over their heads, and then we see 4 spears of Longinus. I originally believed that the flashback was just alluding to the first ancestral race, but upon further inspection it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to refer to the first ancestral race in that specific flashback. And furthermore, why would they show us 4 spears right after? So in essence, there are probably 4 atoms, and if not at least 3 confirmed. How did they get there? How do they function? Why are there 3 more deities than in the original continuity? As much as I thought about it, I don't have any answers for this. In fact, it kind of pisses me off that the moment I started to believe I cracked Evangelion, they complicated things even further. But alas, 4 atoms is the least of my problems. Like, who the hell is Mary? In my 2.2 analysis video, I didn't even bother to address Mary as a character, because it seemed like her introduction was purposely cryptic as a way to say, you'll find out more in the next film. But what the actual hell, yo? We went through 2 movies getting to see her have rapport with everyone, yet have not received any character development from her quite like the other characters. She's also one of the few main characters who wasn't part of the original cast, yet seems oddly important. I still can't quite put my finger on the idea that she's either shoehorned as some kind of red herring, marketing tactic, or if she's going to play a huge role in the next film and reveal why she's important in the first place. But if there's any proof that she might play an important role in the next film, it's this following scene. When Fuyutsuki explains to Shinji that Yui Ikari's soul is stuck in Unit 1, and Shinji's waifu crush is actually a clone of his mother, ew. We see an image where we see Yui with a baby Shinji, and a woman that could be possibly related to Mary. Now I understand that in the anime world, human features are difficult to define, so it's difficult to create enough variety in character designs to make certain characters look related to each other. So it's possible I'm losing my head over another character with glasses. But is it possible that this is also Mary's mom, and Mary has some kind of special relationship with her Eva, similar to that of Shinji's and Asuka's? I don't know. And to be honest, there is 0 evidence backing this theory up, but it's given me some food for thought considering that Mary's role in the Rebuild series has been lackluster at worst and enigmatic at best. But okay, now that we've swept those observations out of the way, in what ways does Gendo's plan differ from Seele's plan? Well, for starters, I believe that Gendo wants to do a similar thing to what he tried in the end of Evangelion, which is turning everyone into LCL who wants to accept Instrumentality. That way Yui can revert into LCL and Gendo can spend eternity with her as one. This is evidenced by the scene where Gendo goes on to check with Seele to see if they have anything new to say, and Fuyutsuki spills the beans in front of Seele saying, "Do you want to use Unit 13 this time?" implying that Seele and Gendo's plans went down the toilet when Masato used the dummy plug on Unit 6. When Gendo silently agrees, Fuyutsuki adds, "It's also for Yui's sake," implying that Gendo's plans are aimed at rescuing Yui from being trapped in Unit 1. Then later, Fuyutsuki gives Shinji a complete breakdown of Gendo's plan, saying that destroying the world is only too easy, rebuilding it is not so simple, however, implying that Gendo isn't fully capable of rebuilding the world nor undoing the harms of the second impact, but at the very least he can give those lost a chance to come back. The implication, however, is that the only way he can do this is if the dead turn into LCL, and at the cost of Gendo's own soul, Fuyutsuki's words not mine, he can achieve his goal by becoming LCL. The reason nobody is cool with this, however, is because Gendo's plan is a bit selfish. Allow me to explain. In order for Gendo's plan to work, and to avoid being undone in the future, he wants to kill all the gods as part of the terms of Instrumentality. This would mean that all atoms would die, Lilith would die, and as a result, anybody born after Gendo's Instrumentality would not have a soul. This means that for eternity, the rest of humanity would lose all forms of permanence mentioned at the end of Evangelion, and nobody in the future would truly be alive, nor could they opt for turning into LCL, because they would no longer be children of Lilith. Though this doesn't sound so bad, it goes completely against Wille's philosophy, which wants to restore a world where suffering is possible so that happiness could also exist. In fact, even Fuyutsuki mentions this as the ideal world, stating in 2.2 that he prefers a chaotic world that's been soiled by man, as opposed to a world cleansed of the original sin where no man can enter. Though Gendo's plan doesn't seem ideal to Fuyutsuki because it compromises humanity's existence for the future generations, it still isn't as extreme as Seele's plan. Further evidence for Gendo wanting to fuse with Yui is how Fuyutsuki at the end of 2.2 mentions to Gendo that, just as we thought, between those two they were able to awaken Unit 1, referencing how Shinji and Rei's bond was able to push the third impact into fruition. Gendo replies by saying that his goal is almost reached, implying that Shinji would fulfill Gendo's wish to allow him and Yui to be reunited, because Shinji would probably also want to be reunited with Rei, and as a result would set the conditions of Instrumentality to allow those wanting to be bonded with others to do so. There's also a weird subtext about Gendo becoming a bit of a god himself. In the end of Evangelion, we see him fuse with Adam's embryo and want to fuse himself with Rei, implying that Gendo would form part of the collective consciousness of Adam and Lilith. And though we haven't seen much evidence for this happening this time around in the Rebuild series, we do see Gendo get the key of Nebuchadnezzar from Kaji, which resembles an Adam embryo. Though I can't tell you guys what the key of Nebuchadnezzar is, the fact that it was stolen from Seele, and the fact that we haven't seen it used yet, implies it will play a role in Gendo's Instrumentality. Maybe. This adds another reason why nobody trusts Gendo to incur Instrumentality, because in the end, it is quite possible that he will be deified. Now let me explain Seele's plan. For starters, Seele are wannabe gods. When we see Gendo attempting to kill them off, he states, "Though you have changed the form of your souls, you are still creatures who have tasted the fruit of knowledge." The fruit of knowledge, of course, being Lilith's seed of life. This means that Seele members were seeds of Lilith, aka humans, who changed the form of their souls to become immortal. And in a mocking tone, Gendo tells Seele that though they could have lived forever, they cannot escape the fate of death just like us, obviously referring to humans. So if ending the Seele members' lives and telling them they can't live forever is the point of contention, then this implies that Seele wants immortality through the Human Instrumentality Project. Gendo, however, adds something interesting. He states that he will enact the Human Instrumentality Project, on his terms of course, but adds that he will also kill the god that Seele had abandoned. So this means that Seele also wants God dead, and before the final monolith is killed, it explains that it wishes for the complemented perfection of mankind and the peaceful purification of souls, indicating that they want mankind to evolve and purify its soul. In other words, Seele wants man to replace God. If we take what Gendo said in 2.2 while in space, he states that some, referring to Seele, want a world cleanse of original sin that no man can enter, which to me means a mass extinction of free will, yet without the selectivity of Gendo's more selfish plan. So how can I say with certainty that Seele wants to replace God if it seems that they want everyone to be equally fused and godlike? Well, as Gendo said, Seele had abandoned God despite claiming to be his vicar on Earth. It's like if the Pope claimed to be God's representative and had long ago planned for his death, while claiming to still be on his side. If we look at Seele's motto in the Rebuild series, we see an archaic German,
richtet Gott wie wir gerichtet,
which means we judge as God judges above the firmament. This basically means that Seele sees themselves as the second in command beneath God, and similar to how Lucifer wanted to overthrow God because second in command wasn't good enough for him, Seele wants to kill the gods and inherit their place, effectively killing all life on Earth in the process. I'm also inclined to believe that if Seele succeeds, they would still retain their free will as opposed to everyone else. Though very speculatory on my part, Seele are already part human and part gods, so it's possible that the Human Instrumentality Project wouldn't hinder them in the same way as all other Lilin. We must also go back to the key of Nebuchadnezzar. The fact that Seele had it implies that they were planning on using it. And could it be that this key is one of the avenues to fuse with Adam and avoid a full disintegration of one's ego? Who knows? But I'm super intrigued to see what role this little baby nervous system will play in the final film. Now, we need to talk about why God is a liability for both Gendo and Seele. The title of this film is you cannot redo, with the not being in parentheses. This means that redoing the actions of the past are within the realms of possibility, if all of the other proper criteria are met. This is why Kaworu believed that if Unit 6 was impaled with the Spear of Cassius, that he would be able to fix everything and bring happiness to Shinji as a result. Meaning, as long as there are gods to open the doors of guff, anything is possible. And it's not just Gendo and Seele who want to kill God to prevent a redo, it's also Wille. Their goal is to kill the atoms once the remnants of Nerve and Seele are destroyed, and possibly keep an embryo of Lilith in the basement again, just to ensure humanity's future. But ultimately, for them, it is unacceptable to run the risk of future impacts, and to destroy human agency as a result. So no matter how you slice it, no matter the organization in Evangelion, redos will always be possible as long as you have the right ingredients. And because of that, that is why God must die.